In my last video I said the next operator I'll talk about is one I actually like. I lied. We're talking about Humus instead. One reason is because he just released on Yen, but there's also another reason I want to talk about him. I don't like Humus, I don't enjoy how his kit works. Despite that, I believe he is a fine 4-star and has a perfectly functional kit that's suited to a 4-star. It's a weird position. I want to dislike him, but I don't think there's anything objectively wrong with him. So I want to unpack my thoughts on him, for my sake, if for no one else's. He is a Reaper like Wapuma, and so our points of comparison are Wapuma and his main 4-star competition, Estelle. There is also another 5-star Reaper that came with IS3, but I don't even remember the name, so I'll leave them out of this. Before we start the analysis, here is a thing that only Humus can do among Reapers. Neat. He has a similar stat spread to Puma, okay attack, stupidly high defense for a guard, and rather low health. The biggest difference is the talent. Pluma gains a stacking attack speed buff and Q, while Humus has extra max health in the form of a barrier. In almost any circumstance, Puma's talent is superior, since in a game like Arknights, while a strong attack is the best defense, the opposite isn't true. The only case where the barrier talent can be better, apart from surviving one-shots, is when they don't have any enemy in range to heal from, but are taking range damage. This is a somewhat unrealistic scenario since you decide where to place the operator, and you could always use some other operator to deflect range attacks. His skill 1 is similar to Pluma's skill 1, but instead of doing 2 hits, it deals 1 hit for more damage and recovers up to 80 health. You may think that Pluma is better against enemies with low defense and he gains advantage against enemies with higher defense, but it doesn't work out like that. It is a similar situation to Bagpipe's Q3 versus Vigna's Q2. There are technically cases where Humus S1 will do a bit more damage than Puma S1, but it is against such high defense that both will be ineffective and you're better off just using a different operator. Or skill in Puma's case. That dev breakpoint for Pluma and Humus skill 1 is a bit above 1000 defense. Curiously, it also stands up similarly to Estelle. At lower dev breakpoints, Estelle's skill 1 and skill 2 can output more damage on average than Humus will, while at around 1000 defense they both do poorly, even if Humus is technically better. Though it should be noted that Estelle can do way more damage with skill 2, but it's only for a small window. Estelle is more suited for killing one enemy with high defense among other weaker enemies because of this, while Humus can likely tank that one enemy for much longer than Estelle can. Something we should take into account when comparing Estelle and Humus is the archetype difference. Humus has a wider range than an AoE guard and can attack an unlimited number of enemies. While it's not always relevant, there are many cases where this will allow Humus to do way more damage than Estelle can output. This doesn't mean that more than 3 enemies automatically means Humus is better. If we look at a map like H96, we can see that Estelle can handle the massive rush of enemies at the start, while Humus struggles with the same enemies and leaks regardless of what skill he uses. On to skill 2. It increases his block by 1. Since he isn't an AoE guard, this serves no offensive purpose, but it allows him to stall out one harder to kill enemy without lowering his block to 1, so it is decent versus some trash waves. It also has a Vigor effect that increases his attack by 45% when above 50% health and 90% when above 80% health. This is why he has a barrier talent, so he can lose a bunch of health and still have the Vigor effect on S2. Speaking of the barrier, I should mention that it can only be stacked up by his own healing. Perfumer or Skadi will only heal his health bar. The same applies to healing tiles, they don't regenerate the barrier either. Unlike his skill 1, this doesn't increase his defensive ability in any way, and blocking more can just cause him to take more damage. The most interesting use case I've seen of it over S1 was on a chapter 10 stage, in order to avoid the SP debuff. In comparison to Puma, skill 2, the gap in DPS is so massive it's not worth discussing it in detail. If you get the impression that I'm comparing him to Pluma just to shit on him, that's not my intent. My goal with this comparison is to provide context for how strong he is with a similar operator. He is supposed to be weaker than Puma since he is a lower rarity, and that's perfectly fine. Let's end the comparisons with Puma here and focus on to Estelle. Compared to Estelle, Humus has a similar amount of health, thanks to his barrier, and significantly higher defense. He has about the same attack. Humus heals and hit, while Estelle heals and kill. Which one is better depends on the enemy they're fighting, but most of the time Humus gets the advantage. Regardless of what skill is used, Estelle can consistently out DPS Humus, unless he gets value out of attacking more than 3 enemies at once. If deployed on a poison mist map, every time the mist damages Humus's barrier, it will make an annoying sound. This isn't relevant, but I hate it and I want to complain about it. Finally, it's worth mentioning that Estelle can be healed by medics, while Humus cannot. While this should be a point for Estelle, her skill 2, the higher damaging skill, prevents medic healing in the first place. In addition, the only time I've ever had Estelle versus Humus under a medic be relevant, Humus was better anyway on H10-1, because his higher defense led to him taking way less damage overall. While far weaker, Estelle and Humus have kind of the opposite relation to Pluma and Spectre. Pluma is better versus Trash, while Spectre's punks elites easier. With 4 stars on the other hand, Estelle eats all the Trash mobs easier, while Humus has better chances of tanking an elite enemy. There are many other better tools if we specifically need to fight an elite enemy though. What Humus is good for is dealing with low amounts of trash to deal high enough damage to threaten Estelle while staying alive. Because Estelle does more damage than him, he is a bit more niche than he otherwise would be, but he can do some things she can't do. This is a reasonable relationship for similar operators of the same rarity. I think I understand why I dislike Humus now. In fact, I don't dislike him at all, I just dislike Reapers as a whole. They have very high defense, so they're good against physical. They self-heal, which is good against start damage, and they have somewhat high damage, so they deal well with most enemies. It is a very generalist archetype, and I don't really like generalists. I find operators that do one thing really well, but are awful at something else to be much cooler. Jaya might be worth talking about next. He is like the immortal god emperor of generalist kind, but has an unusual drawback despite that. I'll do a few videos on chapter 12 first.